Testing 1, 2, 3. Getting perturbed. Okay, so average grade is an 83. Your grade should be posted. I got some very clever people in here. I'm gonna have to change my test because under the question of vertical integration, half of you put to increase the return on investment, and I can't deny the answer. Yeah, I mean, why do you do vertical integration? The true test is that there's other things like both the ability to control and some other things, but when I come in and I state, well, the only reason to do anything is to increase return on investment, what can I do? That's why I gave you full credit. Okay, very good job. So the average grade was an 83. I had a couple of 108s. Pretty good, very good. I think y'all did fairly well. Yes, I did curve, but even with the curve, you did pretty well. That's the toughest test I get. Okay, I just let you know. From now on, the tests are going to be online. I just feel like, given the difficulties that we've had, especially with our online difficulties, I want to error trap that out. So the next test, which will be chapters 6, 7, and 8, with a little bit of 9, that will be online, and it'll be on the day here that you would normally be here, but you could be anywhere, and it'll be the same time frame that you would normally take the test. Okay, so well done. Yes.
So do we have to test 3 and then final?
That's correct. That's correct. The final will be on it will be on power, conflict, and relationships, and that will be, you know, the last couple of weeks. We'll finish up with that. I will put the recordings up, and it will be online as well. The final will be multiple choice completely. So that means that you can calculate your final grade automatically. There will be no essays. So that's the reason why I do it. And I will put out a second group of optional bonus questions, and you'll have about 3 minutes to do it, so that if you want an extra 8 points, you can get that as well. Okay. So I have gotten really interested in what IKEA is. Has anybody been to an IKEA, by the way, in Charlotte? Okay, lived through it, huh? I mean, did you find the exit? How long did it take you?
I don't remember. I think I went when I was like a little kid.
Okay, I was about to say it's the most honest discussion I've ever heard about. Wait till you have Swedish relatives. My wife is Swedish. She's Dr. Alvinson. And when it came to outfitting our house, her mother and father came along. I didn't go. God help me, I wanted to stay away. And 8 hours and $3,200 later, they came out alive. So anyway, now what I found interesting about this is that IKEA is opening these 8 new stores, but they're not the traditional IKEA size. So an IKEA is about 3 times the size of a Walmart and it's 2 floors high. So, just put that in your mind. And yet these are what IKEAs are launching. And once again, think segmentation, targeting, and positioning. And this is a location that specializes in kitchens, bedrooms, and living room planning. Because what's the number one issue that anyone who ever buys from IKEA, what's the number one problem they have? Thank you, yes. Putting the stuff together, almost said a bad word. So IKEA has listened to the consumers and they're starting to put these things out. And what I find fascinating about this, once again, is this investment in retailing when retailing is allegedly dead, which it is not. And as I've said before, retailing is still powerful and it's more powerful than ever. So I thought I'd just show you this. These are also the outlet kind of stores that Belk is launching at the same time. I think it's very interesting. It's getting leaner and meaner, focusing more on the consumers instead of the omnipotent department store concept. They're talking about slicing little pieces of themselves, and I think it's a great idea. Okay. No, I will not. So without further ado, let us move ahead and see how quick we can get out and enjoy the cold weather. Okay, so 2 things we talked about. We talked about yesterday how we go about Tuesday, excuse me, how we go about achieving retail success. And one of those is cost side strategies, where we try our very best to maximize or optimize the cost that we have. In other words, we pinch our pennies till they scream. And so what we try to do is, in essence, lower the cost that we have. Now we're going to talk about the other side, which is demand side. And what are the demand side strategies, hopefully, that we can do that ultimately will help us to achieve success? Now, the nice thing about the demand side strategies are these are old friends. We've already talked about these. And so what we're doing is we're just taking the concept and we're going to put them into a retail environment. And guess what they are? These are very much the same service outputs that we've always talked about. But, well, like I said, we're going to tweak it just a little bit and associate it with retail. So, bulk breaking. This is the core operation of what a retail outlet does, beside providing it. A retail intermediary breaks apart sizes into smaller and smaller bits until we offer the customers exactly quantity that they want. It is not surprising that a large bottle of dishwashing liquid can cost the same as a small bottle of dishwashing liquid. And so, as I've said before, when we go travel, and we generally try to stay at timeshares and those kind of things, because it's much more helpful, especially when you have children, to be able to do these things instead of constantly going out and needing to be able to do things like buy food and that. Ultimately, what you want to do is you want to be able to have the right size of tools, such as dishwashing liquid, especially for weekend getaways. That exact size is so valuable to us, we're willing to spend whatever money is necessary to be able to achieve that. This spreads into just about everything. If you look at the smaller the sizes they get, the more price per unit that you spend. And it is not just because they want to be able to achieve the margins or higher margins on smaller things, but basically the consumers value those things as well. And you're basically, the traditional saying is, all the market will bear. That's why they're that price. if the prices consumers were not what they wish, they will do one or two things. They'll either not buy them or they'll do like we do. We buy the small bottle. We've only bought one. We buy a giant bottle and constantly refilling it. That's what consumers do. Other consumers, excuse me, other retailers who don't wish to be able to do those things, such as supermarkets, such as a Costco, they will accept that the consumers do not want to spend that price and they will charge less. And so Costco is one of those, anybody gone to a Costco or have like okay, do you have like one of the cards or whatever?
No, my parents do.
Your parents do. You have one as well? Okay. Costco is fascinating because it is a true discount club. Costco sells everything at cost. Exactly what it costs them to buy and to ship. They only make money on the annual fees. That is very difficult. Now, Costco limits themselves to 7,000 items versus 53,000 items that you would have at least in a standard supermarket, but they focus on those particular 7,000. And not only that, but really, they do this really cutesy thing about every 6 to 8 weeks, they change everything of where everything is. They change it all around. So Costco becomes a hunt as much as it becomes a place to go buy something. And people go along with it, okay? As I said, the less price per unit is accepted for two reasons. One of them is, once again, the end user performs channel functions. They'll do the break bulking. And the second is that quite simply, the consumers value the larger sizes at a different level. And so bulk breaking, the smaller and more finite amount you will notice just is a measure of what the consumer values. Now, it's different, of course, between a supermarket and a convenience store. If I were to spit it out, Dave, a small bottle of Prel at Lowe's Foods, walk across and go to the convenience store, I might see that same Prel costing twice as much. The difference is because the Prel at the convenience store is priced because the consumer's value on that is convenience. Once after 10 o'clock, I can't go into that Lowe's and buy it, but at 4 a.m., I can go into the convenience store and buy it. And that's why the prices are different. It's how the consumer values. Spatial convenience, this is where the convenience store comes in. Remember our definition when we were talking about intensive distribution or selective distribution. Intensive distribution is especially for convenience goods, and those are the goods that require little or no effort to obtain. It is quite simply the most convenient spot. Now that varies across segments. It also varies with the goods themselves. Convenience goods, I would also put in fast-moving consumer goods. Don't have to worry about that for a test, but it just basically are those goods that are the closest to obtain. The little effort is not only in physical distance, but also in our processing of how or what to buy. Once again, as I've said, we do not use a lot of brain matter when we're trying to decide which candy bar we buy. We use peripheral cues such as size, shape, those kind of things, and colors, and those how we make choices. Now, one of the smart things is that convenience as a concept, when you think of a store, has changed. So, anybody been in the Walgreens lately? I have. What can you buy there, by the way? What can you buy in a Walgreens?
A lot of stuff, but mostly just like pharmaceuticals.
Right. And your first answer was right. A lot of stuff. Walgreens built up a series of outlets, I think 4,600 across the United States. And almost secondary, they realize we've got 4,600 locations where we can sell everything. So Walgreens, over the space of the last 2 to 3 decades, has started selling a lot of different things. They have a sufficient, not a lot, but a sufficient amount of grocery items so that you can go in and buy those particular goods. By the way, pharmaceuticals have always been paired, pharmaceuticals have always been paired with beauty products. That started around the 19th century because it is just one of those particular similar character or categories that seem to go well together. And so spatial convenience, especially when it comes to chains, reaches out and gives it an advantage that sometimes is not exploited. So we have CVS, Walgreens, and Rite Aid. And of that battle of the three, Rite Aid has been the one that's taken the biggest hit. CVS and Walgreens ultimately have been the big survivors. Waiting and delivery time. It is very, it's an intangible thing about how long consumers are willing to wait for items that they wish to have, including things that are out of stock. Out of stocks can be difficult and damaging. However, consumers can counteract that by the desire for those particular products. So my daughter is going to be 13, and she is a computer junkie. She is an anime, she's in all sorts of things like that that she's focused on. And so her birthday's coming up April 15th, and she wants a Nintendo Switch. So the release date, however, for the Switch 2 has been rolled up to April 2nd, and now I have a conundrum. So do I bank on those 13 days and see if I can get the Switch 2 over the regular Switch? And I've looked them over. There's a lot there in the Switch 2 that's pretty cool. And so now I'm about to play a waiting game, whether or not I'm going to hold out long enough to see if the Switch 2 is reality. So I have a son who's 35, and he's been into gaming forever. And he's like, yeah, Dad, but you can't bank on it. I'm like, what? It's a 2. So anyway, I'm not sure what I'm going to do. There are many things that you're willing to trade time off on, especially if you're compensated for the wait. So if I get better delivery options, and whether or not it is acceptable to wait is another difficulty as well. Waiting and delivery time is a service option solely on what the consumer is willing to accept. So when the original Wii came out in 2007, I can't remember which one it was, when I used to be an IT guy and I would get all the IT rags. And one of them, this is true. I mean, when Nintendo was about to launch the Wii, they were 6 months away from bankruptcy. And there were a lot of other companies, especially Microsoft, that were just waiting to be able to get their software library. 18 months before, I remember reading in InfoWorld that Nintendo was about to come out with a kinetic system of interaction that was going to revolutionize everything. So when the Wii came out, for 3 years, consumers were willing to wait 3 months to be able to get in a Wii, quite simply because nothing compared with it. And of course, now there are other options as well. But waiting and delivery time is one of those difficulties that, depending on its desirability, either consumers are willing to wait or not. So product variety, let me bring up a diagram to make it easier for you to understand this. Because a lot of these things can be very difficult to understand. And generally, I want to be able to have a nice diagram that makes it easier for you to understand. Oh, come on, give me a break. I do not need a count. I've been here forever. Trust me. Let's see. All right, we'll go back. So. Right. So we'll use this. Never mind. So what does breadth, depth, and width mean in a product mix? Okay. So the breadth is how many different items, categories that you might have in a particular product line. And so if we look at this particular definition, we see tennis rackets, tennis balls, and apparel. They don't even have to be related, okay? They just mean the variety, the breadth, the different number of units that are available. The depth means the different types of units within that product category itself. And so that leads to what's known as the assortment. Variety, the number of different units, Procter & Gamble, all of the items they would have. Depth is the different number of product brands within one line. So Procter & Gamble has hundreds of items in their product lines. And then they will have a different or assortment of product brands within that particular category. Laundry detergent. Procter & Gamble has, with all of those, just in laundry detergent, in their depth, they have 11 different brands of laundry detergent that they sell. And it sounds crazy. Why would you have 11 different types of laundry detergents? But each one of those has its own unique market that they appeal to. And people will come in and buy Tide or Gain or Cheer or Downy and nothing else. And yet they're all from the same corporation. And the answer would be why? And the answer is quite simply because each one of that particular consumer segments considers them very valuable. Now, as I am a store and I am a supermarket, my decision on which one of those particular 11 that Procter & Gamble sells is a major decision for me to think about. But a supermarket is built on the breadth and the depth. The average supermarket in the United States has anywhere from 54 to 160,000 different items. It is fascinating if you're like me and I'm a wonky. I mean, I love these kind of thoughts, but just think about 150,000, 60,000 different items that you have to stock. Supermarkets themselves survive on only a 2% margin. So that means that when they sell $1 million worth of goods, they keep $20,000. And how is that even profitable? And yet supermarkets go on and go on and go on. And it's quite an amazing thing. But it doesn't mean that all supermarkets have to follow the same particular line. If you go to Walmart, Walmart does not follow the same strategy. Walmart believes in variety, but not necessarily assortment. Now, one things that they will have in their assortment is Procter and Gamble, because they and P&G have a very long-term relationship that they're very happy to keep going. But they might have a third of the items that you would find in a normal supermarket because that's the decisions they're willing to make. It all depends on the top management's decisions. Dollar General has an entirely different way of thinking. Dollar General decides that if they have 80% of the variety that could be expected out of a Walmart, and not even worrying about the particular assortment, what they do is they combine variety, a little bit of assortment, but convenience, which is the third item in their particular mix. It all depends on what is their particular mission statement and their objectives. So this goes also back to Dollar General, this last thing, which is just, narrative stuff. So I told you about on Tuesday, the purpose of the buyers in the Dollar General. So the buyers are actually people, and they're the ones that buy particular lots of goods from their manufacturers or from their wholesalers. And so what you will find is that the buyers inside of Dollar General are actually a profit center for D&G, as much or even more than the goods that they sell on the floor. And so what the buyers do is squeeze the trades so that they can actually get more money out of everything they sell versus Walmart, who believes availability is more important. These are some of the things that happens, by the way, in the real world. And so if you ever become a buyer, by the way, it's money in the bank. That's a great job, okay? You'll learn more about supply chain than you could ever think of. If I can't sell anything different than the competitors in my trade area, I have one thing at my hands that can make a difference, and it's customer service. If I were to look at a geographic area and I was to think Western Carolina versus thinking just of Boone, and I was to think of Toyota dealerships within the Western Carolinas, I could think of perhaps maybe 30, maybe more than that. And I have these 30 or 40 dealerships. Remember that Toyota, like retail outlets, like Toyota dealerships are franchises. The franchises buy the goods first and hopefully sell them to customers in. Each one of these groups is going through some intra competition. How do I maximize what I can do against all of those other retailers? What I can do is maximize my service and ultimately use that as a way of generating value. Retailing is highly labor intensive. The cost of keeping salespeople on the floor is enormous. Reason why you see more and more automation. Remember, when there's cost gaps, what you do to be able to offset cost gaps is you invest in technologies. The difficulty, especially, by the way, SG&A, which used to be originally called selling and administrative expenses, selling and administration. These are what are considered not direct costs. These are costs that, regardless of whether or not I'm going to sell one unit, I have to pay. How do I offset that? I have to decide what the consumer is willing to do for themselves and what the consumers consider to be the most valuable thing that they can get from the selling experience. Specialty stores, the Gap, H&M. They have higher selling and administrative expenses because quite simply, that requires a certain level of expertise in order to be able to achieve a sale. But flip the model, invest in your particular people on the floor, give them a greater amount of information, and hopefully they can make the difference. Okay, so we have the basic structures of retail, in which a retail sale is different from a wholesale based upon the buying motives of the consumers. Retailing is the purchase of goods for their own personal consumption. We have cost side and demand side strategies ultimately to help us achieve success. The retail positioning strategies there are based upon the traditional retail environment. But we know, of course, we're not in that environment anymore. Back in the 60s and the 70s, we had mail order. Now, of course, we have the magic of that item known as, of course, the internet and others. As we talked about before, segmentation, targeting, and positioning happens in channels just as much as it does anywhere else. If I were an electronics outlet and I was selling against everyone, or I would be what's called a category killer like Best Buy, my function or my purpose is to get everyone who is looking for electronics to come by my store. Electronic stores, the investment in them is highly speculative and potentially disastrous. Toys, in the same thing. And the reason is that the shelf life is so narrow, so short. With electronics, 6 months is the maximum amount of time. It's more like 6 weeks, actually. A year ago, I had a gigabyte on a thumb drive. Now, for $20 less, I have a terabyte on a thumb drive. It constantly moves. A category killer, such as a Best Buy, focuses on everything. In sports, a category killer would be Academy. It is difficult to the point of impossible to fight against an academy because they work on price. However, I can be a specialist and I can work on a very narrow group. And so I can be a company like Foot Sloggers that focuses on a very narrow group in that particular category. I can be a mass general store, which is based around a certain geographic area, but also on a narrower focus than you would find at a general department store. Whereas an academy has enormous depth and breadth, a Foot Sloggers has a very, very narrow depth, but a very long breadth. They have a deep assortment in a very narrow group. And they can have a higher margin because you are banking on their experiences and their understanding in their particular world. So I was reading about, I can't remember the name, but there is a gigantic store that focuses on nothing but knitting and fabrics and knitting as well. And I can't remember the name of the group, but they're ultimately going out of business quite simply because they've lost their way and they're trying to compete in the wholesale industries. And yet that particular group is budding and surviving because those that are successful are focusing on just that narrow group and providing expertise. So this slide basically says it is the manipulation of the demand side that ultimately should help you when it comes to focusing on your own mission. When I define myself who I am, I can define the assortments, and I can define the varieties, I can add customer service, and I can compete in a very narrow group. So when this slide was written, it was 2016 and retail was just really getting big. And there were actually multiple internet stores that would come out as early as 2005 to compete in that gray area that Amazon competes in now. And initially 15 to 20 years ago, it was an anomaly. It was unique. The thought of starting as an internet-only store was a good idea, but it required a lot of give and take and a lot of trying to find out who you were. So internet-only retailers are exactly what they say. They have no particular location. They have e-commerce that is built in, and it also requires a certain amount of direct trust to be able to start those stores. The traditional the traditional stores were what we call brick and mortar. And so it took years for ultimately Amazon to achieve the level that they are now. And someday they might be as big as Walmart, but not now. So for all those of you who might think that Amazon is the largest store in the world, it's not. Amazon makes about half of what Walmart does. Walmart annually sells about 1.5 to 1.6 billion annual sales. Amazon is about 569, and I think they've topped that. So I think they're around the 700 million. Walmart's enormous advantage comes not because they sell online, as much as they've achieved certain levels of advantage, especially through their particular channels. Internet retail, going from internet only to a hybrid where you have a brick and mortar, is much harder than starting as a brick and mortar and opening an internet channel. Along with this also, there's been a channel that has been out there forever known as direct selling. Direct selling is Avon, in case you're Pampered Chef. Direct selling is basically face-to-face personal selling in which distributors are independent contractors, one particular individual who buys and has two purposes. One of the things they do is they try to sell the product line, and the other is that they try to come up with more independent contractors. So the Avon and the Pampered Chef and Jafra and many of those, Mary Kay, have two ways in which they achieve profits. They can achieve profits through the goods that they sell, and then they can also become evangelists and get other people to sell as well. when they get other people to sell as well, they get a certain percentage of those individuals' profits. Now, the problem with that is that it's a pyramid scheme. And so what the pyramid scheme says is that the ultimate way to make money is to sign on more and more people. And it doesn't take long to get past the 6th or 7th generation to see that eventually you're going to run out of people. And so it's not unethical, it's not immoral, but it just quite simply is one that does not achieve forever. And then you have internet only, you have direct selling, and then finally the hybrid channel, which I would consider to be the model of today. I mean, even mass sells online. I shouldn't say even, but mass sells online as well. Now, the difficulty, especially with going from brick and mortar to going to internet online, is that when you start out with a brick and mortar store and you start out with having contractors to work for you. Remember, we talked about dual distribution. The claim for neutrality is no longer valid. It means that the manufacturer does not consider their independent contractors to be important anymore. Oh gosh. Not the rideshare group, but the Uber. Okay. Uber has already said that in the future, they will come up with autonomous vehicles and they will do away with their contractors. And to think that they would simply do away with all the people that made their system a success, I'm not sure. But those are some of the conflicts that happen. Well, the difficulty with that is, like with the dual distribution, is that with Avon, you have these contractors, which generally they say are stay-at-home moms, which is the general model. The difficulty with Avon is that when they started selling direct, they immediately started clashing with the agents that they already had. Because basically, here we go, the conflict happens that Avon no longer has the claim for neutrality. Does anybody know Callaway golf clubs? Yeah, have you ever used one? Way back, did you just buy them secondhand or?
Yeah.
Okay, so like the first set of Callaways, if you ever buy a brand new set, they actually fit you like a tailored suit. They were traditionally sold out of golf clubs. You would go to like any golf, fairway. You go to the club, they would measure your hand, they would measure your inseam, they would measure your swing, and you got a set of clubs that were made only for you. And that was the original Callaway model. Callaway in 2007 decided they were going to sell direct, and the clubs themselves went ape for good reasons. They don't make money off of green fees. They make money off of people coming into the club and buying a whole set. And so what Callaway had to do was come up with a compromise so that you could go online to order your clubs if you wished, but you had to go to the club, the golf club itself to get them. The club got some percentage and they were willing to help sell on other things. This is the dangers when you have two channels clashing with each other. Sometimes doesn't work. Matter of fact, it doesn't work a lot. So, talked about the structure of retailing. We talked about how they make money from the cost side and demand side. We talked about the different kinds of strategies that you have in different channels when you're trying to put them all together. And now let's talk about something about the future. So this has to go down with power, and we'll talk about power later. But if we think of the channel structure, manufacturing, intermediaries, and the end user, ultimately, the end user has the greatest power because without the consumer, we can't survive. But between the manufacturers and the intermediaries, who has the greatest control? So from the birth of retailing, excuse me, up until 1994 to 96, power ultimately was in the hands of the manufacturers. Manufacturers could choose who would sell their goods. They would be able to pull franchises. They would be able to pull their contracts in a moment's notice. Retailers were basically hopeful and hoping that they would not do anything that would damage that relationship. In 1994, in the Wall Street Journal, an article by Parasimon stated that the balance of power in channels has forever shifted to retail. And retailing shifted because of one company. Anybody want to guess what that one company was? One retailer shifted all the power to retailers. They're the biggest employer in the world besides governments. They have 2.6 million employees. It's a good guess, but this is 1994 to 96. They have physical stores everywhere. Yes, Apple, close. A general retailer. They actually have 6,500 stores in the United States. They're gigantic.
Oh, Walmart?
Yes, thank you, Walmart. Walmart from 1976 to 1980 was opening a new store every 6 weeks for 20 years. Now think about that. That's astonishing as a number. Walmart fundamentally changed the ground in which we live on to the point where they were able to choose whoever they wanted. And from that moment on, manufacturers have been scrambling to be able to keep up. Competition in retailing is based on price. Therefore, the bigger I am as a retailer, the greater control I have. And yet, if I'm not a Walmart, how do I compete? I can't, many times, especially if I'm in the same trade location, I can't beat Walmart's price. So what am I to do? If I can't change the demand, maybe I can change the cost. With ever increasing power going to the retailers, retailers have turned around and demanded concessions from the manufacturers. I have the control of the operations within my stores, but I also want to control the prices that I have to spend. I invest in new technologies. I start to have unattended aisles in which consumers check their own goods out. I have no problem with that, by the way. There's some people that get real irritated by that. It's faster, it is. And it's that trade-off, okay, as an end user, I perform channel functions and I'm willing to do that because I get convenience. Doesn't bother me. My prices can't change, but hopefully I can lower my costs. What I hope to do, and this is where supermarkets do this, I hope to be able to generate more net income by selling more. And hopefully adding items to my list that I do generate more profit from. So the things that I buy from dealers, I may have little choice. Supermarkets do have one profit center in them, most supermarkets do, that they make margins of 40% or more. Where do you think in a store, not on the aisles, but where do you think in a store, a supermarket makes the most money?
Deli section.
Yes, very good, delis. Meat as well, because those are the things that they produce themselves. If I buy from Del Monte, they can of peas maybe 50 cents and I can charge 52 cents. I don't have a choice. But I can go in the delis and I can go in the meat, buy my own meat, and with an accomplished butcher, I can make more money. I can do 40% margins, 50%. It's the reason why if you go into a deli, if you'll notice, if you're a part of a food buying club, the greatest margins that you're able to get tends to be on the meat because they have more room to give. It's also why delis have started to spread their wings and offer things like sushi and all sorts of other varieties because they make more money off of them and consumers like it. You know, so I think Harris Teeter has like a sushi Wednesday or something like that where all their sushi is half off. They're still making 20% margin for them, so it's great. So with the domination of retailing is squeezing the manufacturers. Excuse me. The pressures on those companies means it's pressure on the buyers. The buyers have got to ship or find more and more ways, like inside of Dollar General, to be able to squeeze the margins as small as they can. The manufacturers have to go along with it because there's so many different alternatives. The other ways that a supermarket can do is try to do their own things. This is the success of Aldi. But in the general market in the United States, the way things are is you have manufacturers and you have many, and the buyers can choose whoever they want. And so how do we do it? So manufacturers are caught, they're squeezed. How are they able to make any more money? So manufacturers started giving deals to the retailers. They started coming up with ways to be able to entice the stores to give them more room or to stay with them. And the problem with that is it becomes a Faustian bargain. Once you bargain with the devil, you can't get out of the grip. And so the deals that the manufacturers to the retailers is like any, reward power that you might find, because once you do it once, you never can get rid of it. And so what are some of the ways that manufacturers have tried to deal with retailers are these, and let's talk about them. So forward buying means quite simply that if you buy 10,000 of my items versus 1,000, I will take care and bring you those things when you want. And so you can buy 10,000 cans of peas at 30 cents, and I'll bring you those cans when you need them instead of 50 cents. And so you buy forward. What it means for me as a manufacturer, though, is I've just sold an allotment. I've got to go make these things and store them somewhere. I've just increased my own inventory cost. And it means also that I've just spent all that money for the next year for that one particular group. So my plans are crazy. So what does it take? It takes what Walmart did and started what's called the continuous replenishment program, where prices are set up on a given level, and instead of buying all of those things at one time, they'll just buy them when they need them. You commit to 10,000 items, but you don't actually pay for those 10,000 items at that particular price. You sell 1,000, You hit a minimum buy, and then automatically those are replenished. Invoices are automatically done. The automation system itself does not require extra money. And you're able to generate a continuous cash flow that doesn't mess with everything else. The problem can also be when we're talking about a large area and you're talking about wholesalers that might have different groups, is that they might buy goods for a specialty area in one place and divert them to another. And so the example would be in California, where there are significant taxes and regulations for the purchase of items which may increase the cost by 40 to 60%. I can buy those things on the East Coast or in the central United States and move them to California at no problems with penalties for buying for a particular area. I think it's a minimal thing, especially if I'm a manufacturer. Why do I care? I'm selling my goods. It's as simple as that. Slotting allowances. What is the most value? Okay. Retail store. Here's the aisles in a retail store. They are 1 to 6 feet high. What's the most valuable area inside of a supermarket? The most valuable area in a supermarket is the islands, the ends. The reason why is that while you have consumers going up and down the aisles, everybody has to pass the ends. Okay? What slotting allowances say is, if you give me that space, I will pay you more money. And the stores have said, that's a great idea. So keep giving me money. And so they do. And so where the manufacturers originally came up with it, now the stores are basically saying, if you want it, you got to pay. Which makes a lot of sense. Once again, they're only making 2% margin. They've got to find more ways to make money. And the slotting allowances are how they do it. Islands are another, like a single stand are significant. They've started to do even advertisements on the floor. All of those are examples of particular slotting allowances. Failure fees have difficulties with ethics. So I am a new manufacturer of a particular thing. I've come out with this great idea. I've had great market testing. I'm trying very badly to crack into a particular nationwide supermarket outlet, but I just don't have a lot of money. And also, I'm not willing, or let's just say the supermarkets aren't willing to gamble as well. So what a failure fee says is, I will put 5,000 units in this store. And if in 6 months we don't sell 4,000, then I have to pay you a penalty. And that is what a failure fee is. It is a way for a small manufacturer to be able to get into stores where they could not necessarily do this before. Zap Potato Chips did it. Now Zap is nationwide. They originally were in Baton Rouge. They were a kettle chip, which is of course different from Lay's in that they are actually fried in an oil kettle. That's why they're crispier than all the other things. The problem with this is there's a moral hazard because you can actually get the stores rooting on failure. Let's say they're at 3,800, 3,900. They could really use that failure fee that you're going to pay them if they can't achieve it. And ultimately, this is where the ethical dilemma happens, because you're not banking on the fail or on the success of your particular group. You're hoping they're going to fail. Bad news. Nothing wrong with this. Private branding is great. Private branding is what keeps Aldi going, and it's why my wife drives to Wilkesboro. Private branding is basically money saving, especially for the retailers, because they're able to generate 35% margins on their branded goods versus 2% when they're selling something like Del Monte. Many times, private branding goods like Sam's Choice are actually canned by the same corporation with their own brands. It is not unusual to look at a Sam's Choice and see canned by a subsidiary of Del Monte. But the thing is, they put Sam's Choice name on it and they can generate a substantially better margin. And that's why you do it. They've been popular in the United States actually for years and years, but it is a generally a standard in Europe. You don't have particular manufacturers such as Del Monte. You have a store which basically brands all their own goods. And it's a great success. It is. So the last thing we're going to talk about before we go is what has happened with retailing. The difficulty with growth worldwide in retailing is quite simply the world is pretty full. Developing nations are very open to globalization of retailing. But retailing is growing worldwide, despite the difficulty. In developed nations, the real estate has already been built out. It requires corporations such as Walmart to build logistics operations that did not exist before. And as I said before, place is the most expensive thing of the 4 Ps. It requires you to deal in relationships with other people where cultural differences can be very difficult. Walmart was caught bribing in other countries and subject to United States laws, where in effect, the locations that they were trying to get to, bribery is perfectly acceptable. And so cultures many times have a break, and there are some places that simply will not accept globalization like Europe, or let's just say within the Europe center itself. Those things would be accepted. What is the success in retailing, which will probably be a bonus question? How do you achieve success in globalization? Generally comes down to partnerships within other countries with companies that understand their particular cultures. But the truth is, it's going to grow. The economies of scale, the advantages are significant. It is worthy for you to try because the sky's the limit and it's a big world and there's almost 8 billion people in it and somebody needs to sell something to somebody. This is not a test question, but generally it's the developing nations that have the fastest and highest growth rates. And so for those corporations that can find value in those particular nations, I would say, especially in Eastern Europe, Western Asia, those particular nations that have, traditionally been in a controlled environment and have become significantly westernized, have great areas. Asia, of course, especially with their growth in population. Australia, New Zealand, great areas for growth, and especially Central and South America. So retail is there, it's happening. We're always finding ways to do it. Within the United States, it has not stopped. And retailing will always be 90% of all spending in the world. Okay, we're closed. Everybody have a great weekend. We'll come back on Tuesday and we'll start talking about warehousing. Have a good weekend.